What if Logan Paul dethrones Jey Uso for the World Heavyweight Championship at Backlash? Well, if this does happen, I believe this will lead to a rematch with Seth Rollins at Money in the Bank, with Rollins ultimately standing tall. But who would dethrone him? Well, tell me. What if Alexa Bliss joins the Wyatt Six? Well, if this does happen, I believe she and Nikki Cross would target Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez, leading to them capturing tag team gold. But who would dethrone them? Well, tell me. What if Lash Legend gets called up to the main roster? Well, if this does happen, I believe she would go to SmackDown, and following a feud with Chelsea Green, she would then set her sights on the Women's United States Champion Zelina Vega. But would she win the title? Well, tell me. What if Drew McIntyre dethrones Jacob Fatu for the United States Championship at Backlash? Well, if this does happen, I believe Drew wouldn't pin Fatu in the 4-way, which will lead to a rematch between the two at Night of Champions, with the Samoan Werewolf reclaiming his prize. But tell me, what's next for Tam Paxley? Well, with Gigi Dolan being released and Shotzi's contract not being renewed, I believe Tam would go after Fatal Influence and be the catalyst for their breakup, before targeting the new NXT Women's North American Champion, Zarya. But would she win? Well, tell me. What if Cody Rhodes returns at Backlash? Well, if this does happen, I believe he would handle Travis Scott during the main event, which would eventually lead to a rematch between him and John Cena at SummerSlam, with the American Nightmare ultimately dethroning Big Match John. But who would dethrone him? Well, tell me. What if Bayley was never attacked by Becky Lynch? Well, had Bayley and Lyra Valkyria became tag team champions, I believe they would have pulled double duty at Backlash, with Lyra losing both titles to the Wyatt Six and Becky Lynch in a triple threat also involving Bayley. But tell me, what if the Righteous sign with WWE? Well, if this does happen, I believe they would align with Karrion Kross, with all three men capturing gold in the process of this partnership. But who would dethrone them? Well, tell me. We're at Backlash, and we kick off the show in style with a WWE Men's Intercontinental Championship match between Penta and Dominic Mysterio. And of course, he's not alone, as the rest of Judgment Day are at ringside. Though before the match can even begin, the referee ejects all members of Judgment Day. They're all furious, but they have to abide by what he says, as they all make their way to the back. So now, the match is officially underway, and it's all things Penta in the early going. He's absolutely dominating the Intercontinental Champion, although all it takes is one moment to bring Dom Dom back into the match, as with him on the outside, he's quickly able to hurl the challenger into the ring post. And now, the title match shifts completely in the champ's favour, as it's now him who's in control. But no matter what he does, Dom just can't seem to keep the man with zero fear down for a 3 count. And with this, he's growing more and more desperate to pick up the win. Yet as he looks for potentially the killing blow, Penta is able to counter as he now fights back. But as he looks for a super kick, Dominic moves, which leads to the referee getting knocked out. And as quick as the flash, Finn Balor comes out of nowhere, though he stops. And he hesitates on what to do, although eventually he makes his choice, as he nails a shotgun dropkick onto Penta before fading into the darkness, which allows for Dominic to nail another frog splash onto the challenger to pick up the win and retain the Intercontinental Championship. Dom Dom's reign continues, yet even in victory, a dark cloud hangs over the big time win. But regardless, what's next? Well, Becky Lynch is looking to wrest the Women's Intercontinental Championship away from the inaugural champ Lyra Valkyria. But who will stand tall? Well, unlike the opener, this starts off rather technical, with both women trying to one-up each other in this department. But Becky's experience is proving to overwhelm Lyra, although she won't stay down without a good fight, which is proven when both women decide to just duel. Although Becky once again overwhelms her in this department too, and with this, she attempts a manhandle slam, although this gets blocked, so Lyra looks for her finishing move too, but this too gets blocked all the same. So the match rages on, with every move of Lyra's having an immediate response by Big Time Bex, which doesn't change in the closing stages of the match, as Becky wrenches Lyra's arm with the disarmer with no remorse in sight. Yet the Burn Lady won't give up, so she pushes Becky off of her before layering into her with seemingly every strike under the sun. And Big Time Bex does get eventually dropped to the outside, although Lyra can't connect the subsequent dive, as Becky moves out of harm's way before throwing her back into the ring as she once again goes back to the arm. But Lyra still won't quit, as she counters before nailing a big exploder suplex. But she isn't done with her, so she drags the lifeless corpse to her feet as she attempts one more Nightwing. Though as she picks her up, Becky's legs completely wipe out the referee. Yet she fights out of the finishing move, as Becky then looks for a manhandle slam, but just like Becky just did, Lyra fights out of that. Although before she could do anything else to the challenger, someone pulls Becky Lynch out of the ring. And of course, the cause of this is the woman who the man took out back at WrestleMania 41. Bayley is back in WWE, and she makes an immediate statement as she nails a rose plant on the outside before turning her attention to the ring, and more specifically, Lyra Valkyria. They could have been tag team champions if it wasn't for Becky Lynch. Maybe in another lifetime, as Bayley also attacks Lyra. But why? Well, after a rose plant, Bayley then decides to debut a new finisher, as she nails a butterfly lung blower before leaving the corpses behind. There's so many questions unanswered, and finally, with the referee back up, Becky Lynch starts to stir. Lyra is still out cold, and the man takes full advantage of this as she locks in another armbar. And with nowhere left to go, with no more fight left, Lyra Valkyria passes out. Becky Lynch has won, and it's all thanks to the woman she took out back at WrestleMania. And no one knows why the role model took out both women, and we're gonna have to wait and see, as the closing shot is Becky Lynch holding Women's Intercontinental Championship over a lifeless Lyra Valkyria. And the lifelessness will more than likely continue by the end of the big meaty fatal 4-way match between Damian Priest, LA Knight, Drew McIntyre, and Jacob Fatu, who will walk out of Backlash as the United States Champion. Well, naturally, the match itself is utter carnage. There's bodies flying, crashing, burning, seemingly anywhere and everywhere. Drew even nails a big leg drop off the top rope onto Damian Priest, which gets him a close 2 count. But that's not all, as he applies a crossface, which forces Jacob Fatu to break up the submission. Although later on in the match, Fatu manages to counter Knight and back body drop him on top of McIntyre. But Priest is still standing, as he even grabs a kendo stick, which doesn't end well for him, as Fatu manages to take him down. Although Priest gets his lick back by nailing a self-ever chokeslam, but by the time he can go into the cover, Drew is able to break up the pin. All 4 men are desperate to become champion, but only one can. And after this fast-paced mayhem, we find out that it won't be Damian Priest, as he gets nailed by a BFT onto a concrete floor. Although before Knight can take advantage of this, Jacob Fatu comes out of nowhere and hurls Knight into seemingly anything and everything. And once he puts him back into the ring, Solo Sikoa asks to deliver the final blow on Knight. He wants to put the nail in the coffin of the Megastar's run, and Jacob reluctantly agrees. Although as Solo is about to nail a spike, Knight moves, which leads to Jacob Fatu being inadvertently clocked by the move. He's stunned, and after taking out Solo, Knight connects another blow at force trauma, but he can't capitalize, as Drew comes out of nowhere and blasts LA Knight with a Claymore kick to pick up the win, and more importantly, the United States Championship. And this means that Drew is now officially a Grand Slam champion, and it's all thanks to Solo Sikoa. Yet Drew doesn't care. He doesn't care what anyone else thinks. Although everybody knows, Jacob Fatu is nowhere near done with that title, nor is he okay with Solo Sikoa. But before the main event, Pat McAfee is looking for vengeance against Gunter, and he instantly sprints at the ring general, although he gets flattened by a humongous chop. Then he looks for a powerbomb, but Pat manages to escape the finishing blow with a few well-timed shots, as the end almost manages to roll him up for the 3. Yet the key word here is almost, as Gunter kicks out and flattens Pat with a humongous clothesline which sends him out of the ring. And from here, the former world champion sends the commentator onto the hardest part of the ring back first. And to add insult to injury, Gunter powerbombs Pat onto the barricade. His spine must be broken in half, and he just gets absolutely decimated from here. It's getting uncomfortable to watch. Gunter even hits an avalanche half Nelson suplex, but he doesn't go into the cover, as he instead goes for a splash. Yet Pat manages to move. There's hope, as he even connects a Code Red, which almost gets him the biggest win of his career. Although that was seemingly all the gas he had left in the tank, as Gunter nails a vicious lariat before connecting a powerbomb and instantaneously locking in a rear naked choke. And just like that, Gunter has won. But the win isn't enough for him, as he looks for another powerbomb. But before he can hit it, he gets interrupted by what he once called his favourite wrestler. Goldberg is here, and he confronts the man who insulted him all the way back at Bad Blood, and Gunter decides to break the ice with a chop, which gets immediately responded to by a spear, but he can't quite manage to hit the jackhammer, as Gunter manages to escape and nail a chop block alongside a powerbomb. And with that, Gunter completely and utterly stands tall. Although now, it's time for the main event of the evening, and it's time for one more match, not just for the show, but between two titans going at it one last time, as it's time for John Cena versus Randy Orton. And the match starts off with a ton of energy, as John Cena attempts an A out of nowhere, which gets blocked, with Randy retaliating by looking for an RKO, which also doesn't work. And naturally, from here, there's a lengthy feeling out process between the two titans. Yet from here, it's time for Vintage Cena, as he nails 3 out of his 5 moves of doom, but as he looks for the 5-knuckle shuffle, Orton gets his leg up before sending the champ to the outside. And the Viper gives chase, as he then dives on the Big Match John before sending him into the barricade. Although he can't hold control for long, as Cena is able to launch Orton into the steel steps before attempting to get a count-out win. But that doesn't work, so Cena continues to work over the challenger. That is, until he gets an idea, as he decides to go to the top rope and dive on Orton, although the Apex Predator manages to catch him and plant him down with a powerbomb. And now, it's Vintage Randy Orton offense time, as with 2 clotheslines and a scoop slam, we all know what comes next, as Randy nails a spike DDT. And there's only one more ingredient left for this Viper Pie, the RKO. But he can't connect it, as Cena blocks it before nailing an AA. Yet somehow, someway, Orton finds a way to kick out at 2. Cena can't believe it. He thought he had the match won, so he looks for another, but this turns out to be a grave mistake, as Orton manages to turn it into an RKO out of nowhere. Yet he isn't done, as he goes into the corner. He wants the punt, and eventually he looks for it, although Cena manages to dodge the fail blow before connecting another AA. But he wants to add an exclamation point to his victory, as he locks in a STFU. Randy has nowhere to go, but he refuses to quit. He won't give up. So Cena forces him to, as he instantly is able to transition into another AA to pick up the win and retain the WWE Championship. Randy Orton was so close, yet so far, as in the end, the show closes with Big Match John winning another big match. Who the hell can stop him? Well, we're just gonna have to wait and see. As if you like this story, I think this might interest you. What if Damian Priest dethrones Jacob Fatu for the United States Championship at Backlash? Well, if this does happen, I believe this will lead to Jacob finally turning on Solo, whilst Priest drops the championship to Carmelo Hayes. But tell me, What if Gunter is Goldberg's final match? Well, if this does happen, I believe the Ring General will completely decimate Goldberg and send him to retirement with a loss. But tell me, what if LA Knight dethrones Jacob Fatu for the United States Championship at Backlash? Well, if this does happen, I believe it will be due to Solo indirectly screwing Jacob over, leading to Knight dropping the championship to Aleister Black shortly after this. But tell me, what if Willow Nightingale signs with WWE? Well, if this does happen, I believe she'll go to SmackDown and instantly target the WWE Women's Champion Naomi, culminating in Willow dethroning the champ at WrestleMania 42. But who would dethrone her? Well, tell me. What if Nia Jax dethrones Tiffany Stratton for the WWE Women's Championship? Well, if this does happen, I believe this will lead to Candice LeRae's return and eventual build-up to topple the Irresistible Force. But who would topple her? Well, tell me. What if Alexa Bliss aligns with Charlotte Flair? Well, if this does happen, I believe they will go after the Women's Tag Team Championships, with them dethroning the Judgment Day shortly after this. But who would topple them? Well, tell me. What if Becky Lynch had returned during the 2025 Women's Royal Rumble? Well, with this reportedly being the original plan, if this did happen, I believe she would have been eliminated late by Lyra Valkyria, setting up a fatal 4-way match at WrestleMania 41 between both women, alongside Bayley and Liv Morgan, with Lyra ultimately retaining. But tell me, what if Kiana James returns to WWE? Well, if this does happen, I believe she'll go to SmackDown and instantly target Zelina Vega, setting up a Women's United States title match on the SmackDown before Money in the Bank. But who would win? Well, tell me. What if Asuka turns on Io Sky? Well, if this does happen, I believe this will lead to a triple threat match at SummerSlam, also involving Kairi Sane, with the Pirate Princess ultimately standing tall. But who would dethrone her? Well, tell me. What if Charlie Dempsey betrays Miles Bourne? Well, if this does happen, I believe he would assault Miles after the match, with no quarter catch crew splitting up after this, which will lead to a triple threat match at NXT Heatwave. But who would win? Well, tell me. What if Finn Balor reforms Bullet Club? Well, if this does happen, I believe he would take JD McDonough from Judgment Day alongside recruiting Roxanne Perez and Julia. But would they be able to capture any gold? Well, tell me. What if Nick Aldis gets revenge on Randy Orton? Well, if this does happen, I believe this will lead to the general manager taking on the Apex Predator at SummerSlam, with Orton ultimately standing tall. But where will both men go from here? Well, tell me. What if Cody Rhodes returns at Money in the Bank? Well, if this does happen, I believe he'll compete in a 6-man tag team match, and even though he'd come up short, this would eventually lead to a rematch between him and John Cena at SummerSlam, with the American Nightmare standing tall. But who would dethrone him? Well, tell me. What if JC Matteo never joined the Bloodline? Well, had he debuted on Raw, I believe he would run through the likes of Judgment Day and American Made until he'd capture the Intercontinental Championship by defeating none other than Sheamus. But who would dethrone him? Well, tell me. We're at NXT Battleground and we kick off the show in style with the NXT Women's North American Championship match between the challenger Kalani Jordan and the double champion Sol Ruka. And the match kicks off in the most expected way possible, as Sol instantly looks for a springboard, but Kalani manages to flawlessly roll out a dodge before she's able to nail a springboard of her own, which gets immediately transitioned into a cartwheel kick to the face. But she gets distracted trash-talking Zarya, which allows Sol to recover and nail a big float over arm drag before sending her out of the ring. And Sol isn't far behind, as she quickly nails the picture-perfect suicide dive. Though she doesn't take advantage, as she actually says to Zarya to not get involved and unfairly aid her. But this allows Kalani to nail a reverse sling blade onto the concrete floor. And to get back into the ring, Kalani decides to show off by connecting a rope-assisted flatliner. With over one-of-a-kind moonsault, it's unable to hurt Sol, as she manages to grab the challenger, yet she can't do anything either, as this gets countered with Kalani paying tribute to her angle with an angle slam. Yet this first pinfall isn't enough, so she looks for a simple splash, though nobody's home, as this allows Sol to nail a super kick and hooked German suplex combination, though this too only grants Sol 2/3 of a possible victory. So Sol looks to snatch Kalani's soul, but she once again moves before taking the champ down with a simple double axe handle. Though whatever Kalani goes for next gets evaded with a well-timed shot by Sol. Yet the roll out of dodge works again for a drop kick as Kalani nails a flippy elbow. And now it's all things Kalani Jordan as she nails an impaler DDT, which gets quickly followed up by a standing swanton bomb. And the onslaught only continues as Sol gets squashed in the corner by a splash. Then she goes high risk as she attempts a top rope swanton bomb, though Sol is able to move before nearly decapitating Kalani with a super kick to the back of the head, which is followed up by a fireman's carry powerbomb, though Kalani sticks in the fight. So Sol decides to put the challenger on the top rope, though she can't find anything up there, as Kalani is able to counter, which puts her perfectly in line for a springboard 450. Yet the champ moves and takes her down. Then she decides to upstage the inaugural Women's North American Champion as she connects a 450 lariat. Though this only seems to light a fire under Kalani, as after kicking out, she counters a kick, spins her around, then nails a super kick of her own before following this up with a poison rana. But Sol somehow keeps up from this, although she gets put straight back down with another. And this greatly worries Zarya, who actually goes on the apron and starts to trash talk Kalani Jordan. Although she pauses, she doesn't know what to do, until she eventually decides to jump back down. Yet the distraction was all Sol needed, as she nails a German suplex before very quickly scolding Zarya before turning her attention back to Kalani, as she looks for the Sol Snatcher, although she's able to grab her and invert her, but Sol fights out of it. Then both counter super kicks before Sol attempts another fireman's carry powerbomb, though this time Kalani has it scouted as she takes her down, descending to the heavens, then crashing down to reality for 5-star frog splash. But that isn't enough, so she goes for the one-of-a-kind moonsault again, though this time Sol unbelievably has this scouted, as with the speed of a god, she descends and connects a Sol Snatcher out of nowhere. And with that, Sol retains. But would this have been the case if Zarya didn't get involved? Well, before we find out, it's time to find out the state of the men's North American title picture. Who will rise and who will fall? Well, the match is on, and Ricky demands for Javon to bring it, which he of course does, as he nails a Superman punch before nailing back-to-back standing elbow drops. And to complete this combination, Javon forces Ricky up and takes him right back down with a Fisherman Buster, which gets hooked into the cover, though this doesn't do the job. But as he goes under his legs, he gets caught with a super kick, which turns the tide to battle, as Ricky starts to methodically work over the young OG with a kick to the gut and a knee to the arm. But the challenger fights back with a knee of his own, while as he goes for his twisting kick, Ricky manages to get out of dodge before connecting with a neck breaker and subsequent elbow drops of his own. Then Ricky goes back to the arm and hand, with stomp after stomp raining down on the challenger. Though Evans is able to catch his boot before spinning him around as he looks for his cutter, but Ricky once again manages to get out of harm's way. And then Ricky throws Javon into the corner before nearly concussing him with a forearm as he crumbles to the mat and in the perfect position for a double axe handle. But that's not enough for the champ, as Ricky then washes Javon's face into the mat alongside nailing a 4th elbow drop. Thus, Ricky goes for a neck breaker, although this backfires horribly, as Javon is able to overpower the champ and connect a Rude Awakening. Then it's comeback season, as Javon nails 2 clotheslines before catching Ricky's leg again and sweeping him out. And it's time to get bouncy, as Javon looks for an elbow off the top rope, although no one's home, as Ricky then hits a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker. But he wants the finishing blow, though Javon slips out of it as he attempts to roll up the champion for his first title in the company. Yet Ricky reverses the pressure as he attempts to steal the win, but Javon is able to reverse his reversal into another pinning predicament, which gets counted again into a 4th roll-up back-to-back as Evans breaks the cycle and hurls out of the cover. And Ricky then charges at Javon, who meets him with a super kick before connecting his big spinning kick in quick succession. But the former Starks plays possum as he takes out Javon's leg before attempting a Buster Neaton, which gets countered into a Hurricanrana, and this allows for the Young OG to attempt a cutter, but Ricky pushes him away and nails a spear. Is Javon done? Well, no. He kicks out at 2, so Ricky looks for a kick, which gets caught, although he learns from his mistakes and nails it into Giri to the young OG. Then he grabs his arm, although Javon manages to get out of whatever he was planning and nails a cutter. But he wants one more. He wants it springboard style. Yet before he can hit it, Sean Legacy grabs his foot. He wants vengeance for his loss on Tuesday. And Javon is furious as he just dives onto Sean before going back into the ring before he gets met by another spear. And with a followed up Rochambeau, Ricky goes into the cover, but Javon has life. And with him face to face with the champ, he just slaps him, which gets a very volatile reaction by Ricky, who nails a Buster Neaton alongside another Rochambeau to pick up the win and retain the NXT North American Championship. And it was all because of Sean Legacy. And just like the opener, the main question is, would the result be any different had the match been a clean affair? Although this time, our answers are subsided by a certain man's ego, as Ethan Page assaults the champion after a successful title defense. And with a twist of fate in Ego's edge, Ethan Page ultimately stands tall. But who will stand tall in the highly personal inter-family war? Well, before Tony D'Angelo can even get into the ring, he gets jumped by his opponent Channing Stacks Lorenzo with a sledgehammer as he repeatedly beats it into the Don's back, until eventually he relents. He drops the weapon and heads into the ring, and he just goads Tony, and even though he can barely stand, he crawls his way into the ring and demands for the match to begin. So with that, the match is officially underway, and Stacks is all over the Don as he nails an uppercut and even a cannonball into the corner before just stomping him, telling him to put up a fight, which he does as he attempts to roll up the former underboss, which gets him a 2 and gets him put straight back down. And Stacks decides to just go for the kill as he manages to nail the Stacks knee drop, but he doesn't go into the cover as he nails another and another. And with a 4th, Stacks mercifully ends the match, yet he doesn't relent on the punishment as he nails Tony with brass knuckles after the bell. The underboss has now assumed the role of the Don, although everybody knows that Tony isn't done with Stacks just quite yet. But up next, can Miles Bourne pull off the upset of a lifetime and topple Oba Femi for the NXT Championship? Well, the match is on and it starts out with a fierce grapple, yet Oba overpowers Miles, and even though this is the case, they lock up again. And this time, the champ just drives him down. He even taunts at Miles to bring it, and he taunts right back, so Oba hurls him into the corner, yet he does fight back, though as he attempts a dive, the ruler moves and proceeds to dropkick Randy Orton Jr. But he once again fights back with a well-timed knee, although he gets chucked in the air for his troubles. And Oba quickly follows this up by nailing a big running power slam, which only graces him a 1 count. So the Conqueror then just hurls Miles kneeling across the whole damn ring, before he actually does, along with nailing a devastating clothesline, which forces Miles to the outside. But Oba gives chase, as after nailing a European uppercut, he then nails a brutal powerbomb onto the apron, along with swinging him into it. Miles is done. No Quarter Catch crew look horrified, yet the champ doesn't care, as he chucks Miles back into the ring and goes into the cover. But somehow, Miles kicks out, and Oba is quite surprised at this, as he continues beating down the challenger. Although Miles is able to counter a strike and nail an overnight suplex, but due to his back pain, he can't bridge the cover, which allows Oba to kick out at 1. So Miles then goes high risk, though this high risk fails, as Oba clobbers him in the gut before taking him back down. And the NXT champion zones in on the back of Bourne as he takes a page out of Sheamus' book by nailing a trifecta of Irish curse backbreakers, and he connects an exploder suplex to follow suit. But the suplexes don't stop as he nails a back suplex as well, yet Miles still won't give up, so Oba just goes for the kill, though Bourne is able to escape as he even manages to connect a ripcord flatliner, but only a 2 count, so he looks for one more, which he can't connect, as the Conqueror counters and nails a fall from grace. Is Miles done? No, he manages to kick out at the last possible millisecond, everyone is stunned, and this translates to Obafemi as Miles drags his body to his feet, and as one last stand, just like Javon did earlier in the night, he smacks Oba in the face, which gets him another fall from grace. And with that, Obafemi has retained the NXT Championship. But it was a hell of a showing by Miles, as once the dust settles and Oba leaves a no-quarter catch crew behind, Miles crawls back to his feet and stands broken in the middle of the ring with Charlie Dempsey, who unbelievably turns on his stablemate by nailing him with brass knuckles, just like the former underboss did to LaDon. No one can believe it, including Tavion Heights and Ren Sinclair, as they both decide to not make any rash decisions and leave. All the while, Charlie Dempsey leaves Miles out cold. And someone else will more likely be out cold at the end of the TNA World Heavyweight Championship match between the challenger Trick Williams and the champion Joe Hendry. And things get off to a hot start as both men just duel straight away, though they both stagger as Hendry manages to send the challenger to the outside before going to the top rope and nailing a big time dive onto the NXT superstar. But Indeed changes things drastically as Trick is able to send Joe into the steel steps, and he just taunts at the fallen foe before sending him into the ring as he hits him with knees to the back until he sends the big man into the corner and lays into him with punches until he falls. But Trick's onslaught is seemingly never ending, as after removing his boot from Joe's chest, he looks to end the match early with a trick shot. Yet Joe unbelievably manages to catch him with an early standing ovation, though Trick manages to kick out a 2. The match was nearly over in the snap of a finger, yet Joe continues to stay on the attack as he nails 2 forearms, following this up with a shot to the gut and a knee to the face. Then Joe goes for the kill as he looks for a chokeslam, though Trick is able to counter before attempting to discus big boot, yet this too gets countered with Joe taking him down with a simple punch to the skull. So the natural evolution of this is a suplex, although Trick manages to escape and nail a chop block, which gives him enough of an open window to connect a bookend. And Booker T will be ashamed as he can only get a 2 count. But Trick won't stop as he rubs salt in the wound of a suplex before nailing an uppercut and a punch just like Joe's, which crumbles the champ. And now the challenger gets cocky, which costs him, as Joe nails a kick before attempting Obafemi's fall from grace, which gets countered with a trio of punches. And naturally, the punches continue to rain from both men, who duel once again. And once again, they both stagger, though this time, Trick quickly manages to nail a discus big boot, but Joe survives. Trick is beside himself with rage, and this allows Joe to quickly roll him up, though this too only gets him a 2. And he then proceeds to miss a strike, which allows Trick to nail the slam dunk, but Joe still won't stay down for the 3, so Trick puts Joe on the top rope, although he can't quite manage to connect the subsequent suplex as the TNA superstar is able to fight back and hurl Trick away. And this gives Joe a second wind as he manages to connect a gorilla press alongside a gut-wrench suplex in quick succession. It's all things Joe now, it seems, as he manages to nail a Scott Hall special. But with the follow-away slam, the referee gets taken out. The champ can't believe it, though before he knows it, Trick attempts to cheat with a chair, which thankfully gets blocked as he nails a second standing ovation, but the referee is still out. Joe's own power has screwed himself over, and as he looks down at the referee begging for him to get up, Trick nails a nut shot. The TNA champion has fallen, and with this, Trick manages to nail the trick shot. And finally, the referee is up and counts the pin until a 2. Hendry lives, but not for much longer, as after one last act of defiance, he gets hit with one more trick shot to be put down for good. It's a monumental win for Trick Williams. He is now the TNA World Heavyweight Champion, and he is the first superstar to win an opposing company's title during this partnership. It's one hell of an accomplishment from Trick Williams, and a certain Carmelo Hayes would agree with that. Although now, it's time for the main event of the evening, as it's time for the Juggernaut to take on La Primera, or in simpler terms, it's time for Jordynne Grace to take on Stephanie Vaquer. And the match starts off with some pure graps, as each woman attempts to outmaneuver the other, though it's Jordynne's strength that manages to give her the edge in this department, as after hurling Vaquer overhead, she attempts a gut-wrench powerbomb, though the champion is able to get out of it, and she runs off the ropes, although she gets caught by a huge spinebuster, which doesn't get the job done just yet. So Jordan goes for another powerbomb, yet once again La Primera escapes it and nails a headbutt in response. But that's all she can hit, as when she looks for a side slam, Jordan nails a knee to the temple, and even though she swings and misses, the follow-up lariat doesn't. Though Vaquer is able to give her a seat with a knee before sending her out of the ring. And from here, the champ nails the challenger with a huge dive. Then she attempts a German suplex, which gets blocked as Grace is able to connect a beautiful overhead suplex in response. And after sending her into the ring, she then nails just a simple suplex. Though she nails another, yet as she goes for a third variation, Vaquer manages to counter along with nailing a chop block. But Grace gets back up, so she shuts that down with a stiff forearm and super kick, and after a boot wash to the face, Vaquer ends this combination with a leg drop. Yet this doesn't get the job done, so she quickly goes to the top rope, though whatever she was planning at stopped in her tracks, as Grace joins her at the top before connecting an overhead belly-to-belly suplex. Though that doesn't do the trick, so Grace decides to attempt to end the match early. Though before she can nail the pump handle half Nelson driver, Stephanie beautifully transitions into a roll-up, which almost gets the job done. And this upsets the Juggernaut, as she immediately pounces Vaquer over the top rope. La Primera's back might be broken in half, and after being thrown back into the ring, Grace finally manages to connect the gut wrench powerbomb, but that only gets her a 2. She's growing frustrated, and Vaquer just won't stay down, so she decides to target the back with kicks before paying homage to Goldberg and nailing a jackhammer, yet that just can't do the job either, and with her frustration, grows an opportunity for Vaquer, as she nails a desperate knee just like several of the previous matches, alongside an eat defeat which can only grace her a 2 count. But you can't pick her up for the subsequent SVB, which allows for Jordan to reassert control, and after taking her out of one corner, she puts Vaquer in another, as she takes her down and nails a Vader bomb, which once again doesn't do the trick. So she goes to the third corner and nails a dangerous looking powerbomb onto the bottom rope, and to complete all 4 corners, Jordan hurls her into it before nailing a final cut. Yeah, that doesn't satisfy her, as she puts Vaquer back on the top rope, although she can't connect a big move, as the champ fights back, as she even connects a big crossbody to get back into the match. And after a quick second face wash, she then calls for the crowd, and Booker T, as she then nails the Devil's Kiss over and over, which nearly gives Booker a heart attack. But regardless, Jordan is in the prime position for the corkscrew moonsault, so Stephanie goes for it, yet the challenger manages to catch her mid-move and plant her down with a Samoan drop. And to rub salt in the wound, the Juggernaut too descends from the heavens, though as she crashes down, Stephanie too manages to catch her, but she can't hold her. The pain in the back is too much, as she falls soon after, when she gets spiked on her head by a Kudo driver. Surely the match is done! Well, apparently not. Vaquer has gas left in the tank. Grace is beside herself, and Vaquer is somehow able to get up, and she asks the Juggernaut to bring it, as both women begin to slug it out of one another. And eventually they both stagger like Trick and Joe, but Stephanie manages to nail a pump handle half Nelson drive out of nowhere. Jordan's own move! Yet this doesn't keep the challenger down. So Vaquer drags her to her feet as she looks for her SVB, but Grace is able to counter, although Stephanie counters her counter before attempting a back suplex, yet she can't pull it off. And as quick as the flash, Jordan spikes Stephanie on her head again, this time from a muscle buster, and to put the nail in the coffin, she connects the Grace driver, which finally and mercifully keeps Vaquer down for the 3. We have a new champion! Jordan Grace is now the queen of NXT! Who the hell can stop her? What the hell is next for Stephanie Vaquer? Well, we're just gonna have to wait and see. As if you like this story, I think this might interest you. What's next for Julia? Well, now that she's on SmackDown, I believe she would lose the Money in the Bank qualifier, and from here, she'd instantly conquer Zelina Vega and dethrone her for the Women's United States Championship, although eventually, she'll be toppled by none other than Michin. But who would dethrone her? Well, tell me. What if Solo Sikoa becomes Mr. Money in the Bank? Well, if this does happen, I believe he would cash in on Cody Rhodes at SummerSlam, although he would merely be a transitional champion as he'd lose to LA Knight shortly after this. But who would dethrone the megastar? Well, tell me. What if Roxanne Perez wins the Money in the Bank briefcase? Well, if this does happen, I believe Roxy will cash in on Rhea Ripley at Evolution. But who would dethrone the Prodigy? Well, tell me. What if Rhea Ripley becomes Money in the Bank? Well, if this does happen, I believe she'll announce her cash-in ahead of time, setting up her match with Io Sky at Evolution, with Money going back to being on top. But who would dethrone her? Well, tell me. We're at Saturday night's main event and we kick off the show in style with the World Heavyweight Championship match between Logan Paul and the man wearing the classic big gold title belt, Jey Uso, who will walk out of Tampa as world champion. While the match is on, and Jey instantly looks for a super kick, although Logan evades it and hides on the outside. But that doesn't matter to Jey Uso, as he dives on the Maverick with reckless abandon. Then he sends him back into the ring and looks for a splash, although Paul is able to dodge it before looking for the one lucky punch, but the champ counters that all the same. Then it's all things Jey, as he nails a striking combination, culminating in Jey sending Logan Paul back outside of the ring as he attempts to nail another dive, though he crashes and burns, as Logan then hurls Jey to the barricade. Then Logan looks to dive into the ring, but he isn't able to connect with anything, as he gets speared out of nowhere, which only gets him a 2 count. And Jey keeps on the attack, as even though Logan attempts to fight back, he gets an insecurity for his troubles. And the troubles keep on coming for the Maverick, as he gets pounded with punches in the corner, even though Paul is able to fight back this time much more effectively, as he connects a big clubbing elbow alongside a clothesline to take down the champ. And he attempts to continue with the assault with a DDT, which gets countered by Jey, though he too can't manage to nail a DDT, as Paul reasserts his dominance on the match, which really goes into full swing, with Paul relentlessly using his boxing background to good use. And he gets cocky with this, as he attempts to pin Jey with just 1 foot, which of course doesn't work. And this seemingly lights a fire under Jey, who starts to fight back, though he gets put straight back down. Paul even manages to nail an impressive moonsault, just like at WrestleMania, though this too doesn't get the job done. So he tries to go for the finishing blow, although as he looks for the buckshot lariat, Jey manages to beautifully counter it with a Samoan drop. And this is a turning point in the match, as Jey hits a spinebuster, a flapjack, and a suplex variation before rolling him up and nailing a super kick. And to complete this barrage, Jey nails a splash to retain the World Heavyweight Championship, as the show kicks off with a hell of a yeeting celebration, and for one night only at least, with big gold around his waist. Although the next match has nothing to do with gold, it's all about pure personal animosity, as it's time for the Steel Cage finale match between Drew McIntyre and Damian Priest. And the match starts off hot, as both men just slug it out of one another until they both stagger. But Drew looks for an early Claymore, which gets countered by the former El Campeon, who then just drops the elbow. Then he looks for a chokeslam, though his finishing move too gets blocked by McIntyre, who just lays into him with punches left, right and centre, leaving him helpless in the corner to more damage, which includes more barrages of strikes alongside a big boot on the down Warrior. Then it's a Scottish Warrior, who then uses the steel structure to his advantage, as he whips Damian Priest into it back first. But Drew stays on the attack, as he hits more punches and kicks onto the downed fighter. Then he goes into the corner and looks for the Claymore kick again, although once again, Priest gets out of harm's way and blasts him with a super kick. Thus it's now Priest's turn to hurl Drew into the steel, which he does to great effect. And after planting him face first into the canvas, Priest is able to nail a Razor's Edge, which only gets him a 2 count. Then he decides to climb to the top rope, although he gets caught and dropped with an electric chair drop courtesy of Drew McIntyre. And from here, Drew looks for a Glasgow Kiss, which gets countered, although a slap to the ears too gets blocked, and after a missed strike, Priest is able to nail a flatliner, which busts Drew open, but that doesn't get the job done. Yet he stays on the attack, as Priest even manages to nail a South chokeslam, but once again, Drew kicks out. Damian doesn't know what to do, aside from perhaps taking the biggest risk of his career. But before he can do so, Drew rushes over, striking his leg before he meets him up there. And both men just start trading strikes up there. It's a precarious position to be in. This could turn ugly. And it does, as after Drew overwhelms Damian, he sends him crashing and burning into the canvas. He's done! And Drew knows it, as of a subsequent Claymore, he picks up the win. He completely and utterly stands tall. He has beaten Damian Priest twice now at PLEs and can finally move on. and even with the blood streaming down his face, Drew is happy. The voices are gone, and now he can focus on what's next. But up next on the card is a tag team match pitting the new Paul Heyman guys against the unlikely duo of CM Punk and Sami Zayn. Who will stand tall? Well, the match begins with Seth Rollins and CM Punk, and they go at it as if their hatred for one another is still at its brightest, and Rollins actually gets overwhelmed by the velocity of Punk, so he tags in the muscle of his group, and Braun proves to this to be the case, as he completely decimates Punk with big power moves left, right and centre. So Punk has to use his experience to good use, although this gets cut short by a big power slam. Sami wants the tag, but he can't get it yet, as the Straight Edge Saviour is isolated away from his tag team partner throughout the contest. Everyone is desperate to see Sami get his hands on Seth Rollins and Braun Breaker, but he has to wait a bit longer as the isolation continues. Even when Punk gets a hope spot, Rollins just pulls Zayn away from getting the tag. It's sheer utter domination from arguably the biggest stable in WWE currently. Yet no matter what is thrown at Punk, he keeps on kicking, even if it's a struggle. He even gets hit by a double shoulder tackle, which is quickly followed up by a buckle bomb. But Punk kicks out. Then Rollins goes for a stomp, although this gets countered as Punk looks for a desperate GTS, which unfortunately for him gets reversed. There's still seemingly no hope for the dynamic duo. That is, until Punk is able to nail a kick that stuns Rollins enough for him to actually nail the go to sleep. But before he can get the tag, with Braun and Paul distracting the referee, Zayn gets taken off the apron. Only this time, the culprit is Karrion Kross. Punk is in sheer disbelief, but before he can do anything, he turns around into a spear out of nowhere by Braun Breaker, who pins CM Punk for the free. The new alliance has won, and it seems their numbers have grown, which is proven when Karrion also assaults CM Punk after the bell. But Jey Uso looks to even the odds, though he's overwhelmed and tired from his previous match, as in the end, Seth Rollins stomps Jey onto the concrete floor before going into the ring and standing tall with his faction surrounding him. But can R-Truth pull off the impossible and defeat his childhood hero? Well, after John Cena brings out the title most synonymous with him, the non-title match is on, and Cena demands for Truth to give his best shot at taking him down, which he does with a shoulder tackle. Then he hits another, and we all know what comes next. Although as R-Truth looks for a 5-knuckle shuffle, Cena gets his foot up and attempts an AA, yet Truth counters with 3 well-timed elbows to the side of the skull, and he then nails one of his own, which only gets him a 2 count. So he goes for another, although this time, Big Match John is able to get out of his own move before nailing the AA. But a miracle happens, as Truth kicks out. And Cena is flabbergasted at this, as he says at the down corpse, "Damn it, Truth, why keep fighting a losing battle?" And Truth gets up and replies, "Because like my hero once said, never give up." And this actually gets to Cena, although eventually he goes to put an end to the match with a second AA. But Truth scatters, and this causes the referee to be down to the outside before Cena actually nails the AA. And he sees the downed ref and just goes into the corner. He doesn't actually want to hurt Truth more than he has to. Something has changed, but before that change can be fully realized, a nightmare comes back to reality.
Wrestling has more than one royal family.
Cody Rhodes is here, and he's gunning for John Cena as he ducks a shot and nails a crossroads before helping the referee up to count the pin for the win. R-Truth has just defeated John Cena. Everyone is stunned. No one saw this was all coming. And even if Truth didn't win the title, he can say that he was the man who started to break down Big Match John. Although before we come full circle, Cody Rhodes celebrates with Truth as the show goes off the air. And if you like this story, I think this might interest you. What if Zoe Stark never got injured? Well, firstly, get better soon, Zoe. And secondly, I believe that after being pinned in the Money in the Bank qualifier, she would slowly rise in the rankings on Raw, which would culminate in mid-2026, where she would get an opportunity at Kairi Sane's Women's Intercontinental Championship. But who would win? Well, tell me. What if Roxanne Perez officially joins the Judgment Day? Well, if this does happen, I believe she would be screwed out of the Money in the Bank briefcase by Liv Morgan, leading to a SummerSlam match between the two, with Roxy ultimately standing tall. But where will both women go from here? Well, tell me. What if Rusev feuds with Sheamus? Well, if this does happen, I believe this will lead to the two actually teaming up and being the ones to dethrone the New Day. But who would topple the unlikely duo? Well, tell me. What if Ace Austin signs with WWE? Well, if this does happen, I believe he will go to NXT and instantly target Ricky Saints, which would culminate in him becoming the new NXT North American Champion. But who would dethrone him? Well, tell me. What if Chelsea Green dethrones Zelina Vega for the Women's United States Championship at Saturday night's main event? Well, if this does happen, I believe Chelsea would just be a transitional champion as she'd lose to Julia at Evolution. But who would topple the Beautiful Madness? Well, tell me. What if LA Knight wins a Money in the Bank briefcase in Los Angeles? Well, if this does happen, I believe he will cash in during the World Heavyweight Championship match the following Raw, which would eventually lead to Knight dropping the title to Seth Rollins at Survivor Series. But who would dethrone the Messiah? Well, tell me. What if Julia becomes Miss Money in the Bank? Well, if this does happen, I believe she will cash in on Roxanne Perez at SummerSlam 2026, which will lead to the Beautiful Madness eventually losing the championship to none other than Stephanie Vaquer at WrestleMania 43. But who would topple La Primera? Well, tell me. What if Cody Rhodes gets revenge on Travis Scott? Well, if this does happen, I believe this will lead to the two squaring off at Clash in Paris, with the American Nightmare ultimately standing tall. Where will both men go from here? Well, tell me. What if Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed set their sights on the tag team division? Well, if this does happen, I believe they would obliterate everyone in their path, with them quickly becoming World Tag Team Champions in the process of this. But who would dethrone them? Well, tell me. What if Drew McIntyre never got injured? Well, firstly, get better soon, Drew. And secondly, if this didn't happen, I believe he would have won the steel cage match at Saturday night's main event before going after Jacob Fatu.